Hey, hi, hello, and welcome back to another bookish video. I can't believe it's already time to do this, but today it's time for our February wrap-up, which means I have now had 1 month of doing this whole booktube journal, and I'm loving it. Thank you so much for those of you who have been supporting me already as I begin this journey. So we have some shocking flops in here that I never expected to rate as low as I did. And some surprise wins in here that I didn't expect to like as much as I did. So let's jump into the stats. In the month of February, I read 12 books with an average star rating of 3 stars across the board. So just like last month, we will start from the bottom and work our way to the top. So I didn't have any 1-star reads, but I do have 3 2-star reads, and the first was one of the shocking ones. Frida McFadden's The Boyfriend. I usually like Frida McFadden. I go to her when I need what is going to be a fast-paced, no-brainer, have fun thriller. The Boyfriend was not it for me. This book came out last year in 2024, and you have Sydney in this book, and Sydney wants to find her perfect boyfriend. And she goes through a few rotten eggs until she finds the perfect boyfriend, but then the perfect boyfriend has a lot of red flags. And I think those red flags are what drove me crazy because she kept giving him a chance. Like, he's got a burner phone. She discovers that early on in their dating life. And she's like, it's fine. I'm sure there's a reason. No, girl, there isn't. I will say there was a twist at the end of this one I didn't see coming. So I give Frida that. But all in all, this one just felt like one of those horror movies where the whole time I was watching, I was going, girl, get out of there. And I can't root for someone like that. So it was a 2-star. My next 2-star was All Our Shimmering Skies. This is one I read in my first vlog I ever posted on this channel where I picked random books that have been on my shelf for a while that I needed to read. This one was not a win. This is a historical fiction book that came out in 2020, and in it you have Molly, who is this little 12-year-old girl whose family is grave diggers, and they're all living in Australia in the midst of World War II when Japanese bombers come over and blow up their town. That's the end of the historical fiction. Everything I just told you is it for historical fiction, because most of this book is treasure hunt to find this long-lost treasure that's been in her family. So if you go into this wanting historical fiction, you're gonna be disappointed. And it didn't hit for me. It wasn't a win. This was a 2-star flop. My last 2-star of February was probably the most shocking 2-star I've had, and that's Riley Sager. I love Riley Sager. I will still be reading all of Riley Sager's books. This did not lose it for me, but this is by far the worst Riley Sager book I have ever read, and I hate to say that. I cannot believe I'm saying that. This is Riley Sager's book that came out in 2024, so last year. And in this book, you have Ethan. So Ethan, as a young boy, decided to have a camp out in his backyard with his best friend, which was something they did all the time. So Ethan's in his tent having the sleepover, and someone comes and slashes open the tent and takes his friend. And that's the last we ever see or hear or know about his friend forever. So then years later, Ethan is now an adult, and he has actually come back to live at his childhood home because his parents have left it. And weird things start happening, things that only his friend would know about. For a while, this almost turns into like a borderline paranormal book, which, like, in the thriller world, I don't like the paranormal trope. To me, that's an easy way out because you can explain anything that way. So when this started going in that direction, I was like, not loving it. I will say there was more to it than that. There are other people involved in the story and little things that start to come together, including some secrets that are kept years ago when his friend went missing initially. They kind of resurface because there's more to those stories. But this really felt kind of like, so you know those thrillers where like the authors throw out like 20 different hooks because they want you to think it's this person, this person, this person, this person, or this person, and you're just kind of left going, oh, I don't know. That's what this felt like. It didn't feel like there was a flushed out idea beginning to end. It didn't feel like as I was reading it, I could start to put the puzzle pieces together, because it just felt like people were throwing me puzzle pieces. And then the final reveal of what actually happened was another disappointment to me. This one was a 2-star flop for me. I will be picking up Riley Sager again, middle of the night, just isn't one of them. Time to move into our 3 stars. So 3 stars, they were good. I'm not sure I'd run to get them and read them, but I at least enjoyed reading them. So the first one I have is Close Your Eyes and Count to 10. This was an audiobook arc that I got. The book has come out now. It came out February 25th, 2025. The concept of this book was so exciting to me. So the concept of this book is like Mr. Beast meets horror. Like that's how I read this concept. Essentially, you have this extreme YouTuber who is holding a hide and seek competition, ergo, it's like Mr. Beast. Unfortunately, the competition goes very, very, very bad. They're on this island where they're cut off and the storm comes in and things go haywire really fast. The concept sounded so good to me. I was so excited going into this book. The problem is the hide and seek game does not start until you are 60% of the way into the book. When the hide and seek game finally starts, it kind of jumps right to like the catastrophe part. As a reader, I was like, I love this idea. I wish the author had spent more time in the game. The main character we're following is this woman named Adele, who is a mom with a very interesting backstory. So her husband is on the run from the law and did bad things. And so she is both learning how to be a single mother as well as building her own YouTube brand because she wants this to be her income and has done it pretty successfully and has this kind of badass mom vibes, which I enjoyed. I liked it a lot. There were a few twists in this I saw coming, and I think that also knocked it down a little bit for me. So yeah, I think between the fact that I felt like the exciting part of the plot was almost cut out and the fact that it lacked that shock value, it landed at a 3-star. Next up, we have Truly Devious. This one came out a while ago in 2018. This is the first book of a series. And in this book, you meet Stevie. So Stevie's really, really smart. She's a high schooler and she is obsessed with the idea of solving crimes. Her true passion in life is to become a detective one day. And she throws herself head over heels into studying past cases, studying how cases are solved, how police works, the whole 9 yards. And she discovers this school called Ellingham Academy. And this school is this super elite, only for the best of the best. She reaches out and writes this like essay on solving crimes because the school happens to be a place with a famous crime that has taken place many, many years ago, where this daughter was kidnapped, held for ransom, and even when the ransom is paid, daughter never shows up. So that's the backing of the school and the people who founded the school. And so she's fascinated with the school. When she finally does go to the school, it gets interesting because then someone winds up dead there in present day. And she really throws herself into solving the case successfully, I might add. I actually felt like it reminded me so much of the Natural series, which I've read and enjoyed. The problem is, I felt like that series did this better. I felt like the character development in this book was lacking. So the author made these characters with their idiosyncrasies and like made them unique and quirky and all those good things. But as I'm reading it, I had a hard time rooting for the characters. And unfortunately, this one didn't do it as well for me. I don't think I'll be continuing the series. I enjoyed it while I read it. Am I going to remember it in a week or two? Probably not much. All right. Our final 3-star was The Paradise Problem by Christina Lauren. This one came out last year in 2024. Christina Lauren has kind of been a middle-of-the-road author for me, so this fell where I expected it to fall. She has some books that I have loved. She has a lot of books that I liked. I put this one in the light category. I think it was a fun rom-com kind of read that wasn't super memorable or shocking. So in this book, you have Anna and West. Anna and West got married in, I believe, graduate school, specifically so they could stay in married housing, which was cheaper than trying to find off-campus apartments. They have no romantic connection whatsoever. In fact, they knew each other so poorly that she thought his name was West, and it turns out his last name was Weston, and he goes by West as a nickname. So later on, she's like, wait, your name is Weston? And he goes, wait, you don't know my first name? Like, what? That's how well they know each other. And now years later, Wes' family is filthy. Wes has pulled away from that. He has not followed the family line. He doesn't have all the family money. He does, however, have his grandfather's inheritance, which came to him because he got married. That was part of what was in the clause of the inheritance. And so now his parents are going to Wes' siblings' wedding that they're throwing on this private island. And they're like, bring your wife. We're starting to feel suspect of the fact you have a wife and we've never met her. So Wes goes back to Anna, who he hasn't seen in years, and goes, can you fake it with me? Well, let's go. So a good portion of this book is the hysterical pieces that come with. So she has her glow up moment before going to this wedding. And part of that is beauty and spa treatments, including her nails. So she goes with those like really pointy nails that are trendy right now and like cannot do anything as a result. Like she is with Weston going, I can't button my pants in the bathroom at the airport going, I need help because I can't. So it's just funny things like that that will have you chuckling. This book brings that. It delivers that. I think what falls flat is obviously it's a rom-com, so romantic interest sparks. And I didn't fall in love with the romance behind it, which is why I think this one didn't hit higher in terms of star ratings. And I will also say, I think what's really admirable is this book really tries to dive into the greed behind money and like how it impacts your family values. I like books that pull in those deeper messages. Like I feel like it's one thing to turn your back on your family's money and walk away. It's another to turn your back on your family's money and walk away when you have your grandfather's inheritance. So I feel like that part of this, I was kind of like, we're trying to make this a big thing and I don't find it a big thing. So it was a 3-star. It was fun. I giggled. I enjoyed it, but probably one I'm going to have a foggy memory of in a few months. Moving into our 4 stars, I have 4 4-star books to talk about, 3 of which shocked me by being a 4-star. So I've got some books in the 2-star category that surprised me. I got some here that are going to surprise me. The first one was a huge surprise. I listened to We Used to Live Here, which came out in 2024. The premise of this book sounded fascinating. In this book, we have Eve, and Eve is in their newly purchased house that is a giant fixer-upper. She's alone one evening, and this family comes and knocks on the door with their children, mom, dad, and goes, hey, this is so weird, but we used to live here. Can we, like, look around and remember our memories? And Eve is like one of those people who can't say no and be confrontational, which she talks a lot about in this book. And so she's like, sure. They look around. As they're getting ready to leave, their daughter decides to hide, finally comes out, and at that point it's snowing and no one can, there's a bridge out of town. So they end up in this house with strangers and they're just kind of like odd. Like there's just like weird vibes about them. And then the next morning, some really weird things start to happen. I'm trying to come up with the best way of describing some of this without giving away too much. And I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to say, if you think you're going to read this book, fast forward to the time I put down here, because now I'm going to share a little bit more of a spoiler reveal. So fast forward if you don't want to hear it. So this book has paranormal activity in it, in the sense that like weird things that can't be explained are happening. A window moves from one room to the other. A rip in a wallpaper repairs itself overnight. It's just creepy and bizarre. And it's not like scary story you can't turn the page, but it makes you like, what the heck is happening? And I do not like paranormal activity in books, period. But this was a 4-star read. And this is why it's so shocking to me. Because I think the way they did it was less of like, here's a ghost floating around and more of like, here's all these unexplained things. And here's the other strike that I will warn you going into this book. Something at the end happens that is very open-ended. Like you can end this book and think about it in multiple ways. I hate books that don't wrap up clearly. I hate books with paranormal activity. And yet this book is a 4-star read for me. Go figure. I had a blast with it. If you typically don't like paranormal and loose ends and all those things I just talked about, I wouldn't say this is not a book for you. I think a lot of people will enjoy this book. I understand why it's getting the hype it's getting, because I think it's hitting in the categories people like, but I also think it's hitting for people like me that typically wouldn't pick it up. It's a win for me. My next 4-star read is River Sing Me Home. This is another one I read in the vlog. This book is not a book I would typically pick up. I am not sure what inspired me to pick this. I'm surprised I picked it, but man, am I glad I did, because this was a good book. So the premises of River Sing Me Home is you have Rachel. So Rachel is a slave in Barbados. So Rachel, through her years of being enslaved, has had many children, some of which made it, some of which didn't. But as a slave, she didn't have much say in what was happening to her children afterwards. So a lot of them got sold to other people and are now spread out to even other islands. So Rachel decides to run away, but run away with the purpose of finding her children. And that is what the story is. It is her finding one child by one child by one child throughout the story. Sometimes she finds the children. Sometimes she finds people with stories of her children. Every single one of them has their own story that tugs on your heartstrings in very different ways. It's heart-wrenching in so many ways, but it's also one of those books where, like, when I finished reading it, I sat down and I was like, I think it is a good thing that I read this book. I think I learned a lot from this book. I shared in that video at the very end, the author has an author's note where she talks about the research behind this book. Her family is from St. Thomas and has similar stories through her family tree. And as she's at an island doing research for this book, someone approaches her and goes, "You look a lot like someone I know. Hold on." And they get together, and sure enough, they have distant relatives that are connected. And the idea of even today, the fact that there are people out there that don't know who their family are or don't know they have family. It's sad. And the messages behind family and freedom and hope in this book will tug on the heartstrings for sure. 4 stars. All right. My next 4-star read was another shocking 4 stars. And that is The Situation Room. And kind of like River Sing Me Home, I'm not sure what inspired me to pick this one up. This one came out in 2024. And I saw it in Target one day and I was like, it sounds interesting. I didn't buy it then, but I did end up getting it from my library and reading it. This is nonfiction, but even within nonfiction, I still give it an easy 4 stars. This is the history of the Situation Room, which started around Vietnam War and goes up till Biden's administration. And it just kind of talks through like what the Situation was, why it was made, the technology and changes behind the Situation Room. And also, like, with a ton of firsthand accounts, talks through some of the huge moments, like 9/11, like COVID, like all of these things that had huge impacts on our country and the handling of it in the Situation Room. And I will say one thing I was worried about going into this book was I wanted to read the history. I didn't want a propaganda speech. This is very much, they talk about Republicans and Democrats equally in the same way. It is not an attack on one side versus the other. It is strictly just, let's talk about the Situation Room and what it's like and what people live through. And there are some interesting things in here that I didn't know and fascinated me. There's so much interesting information, all the way back to Lincoln, who didn't have a Situation Room, but evidently Lincoln was one of our presidents that liked to be in the know and have information. So they talked about the fact that he was regularly falling asleep in the building that all like the telegraphs were coming in because he wanted to be there to get the information. So yeah, I walked away from this with like some really cool information. I really enjoyed it. It was a 4-star read for me. Not expected. Switching gears to my last 4-star read was very much expected. This is Drowning by TJ Newman. This was also read in my TBR video. So this author also wrote Falling, both of which are plain situation stories. This is the best way to put it. And actually, he just came out with a new book this year, which follows the same trend. And I'm hearing great things about it. So I will be picking up his new book very soon. In Falling, you have an airplane in the midst of getting hijacked. In Drowning, you have an airplane that has crashed and ended up submerged in the ocean with people in it. And the whole story takes place in the span of one day of trying to escape that. So every chapter you see like 2 p.m., 1 hour and 59 minutes after impact, approximately 4.5 hours of oxygen left inside the plane. This is action-packed, beginning to end. One of the things I loved about this book is there's actually a romance element to it, and it's done in a great, great way. So one of the men on the plane is Will, who's this engineer, and he's with his daughter, and his wife happens to be part of the scuba team that is trying to save them and get them above water. And the two of them are actually in the process of getting divorced because they've lost a child. Through dealing with this tragedy, they actually learn to cope and deal with their past tragedy. And I said in my wrap-up video when I was vlogging about this that, like, I feel like TJ Newman was in my head because everything ended the exact way I wanted it to. Everything came around and wrapped itself up right to, there was one part I thought I wasn't going to love. And then like the last page, the author was like, here's your ending. The author could not have ended this better. I will be reading his next book for sure. My last 4-star book is an audiobook I literally finished this morning, which is The Family Experiment. This is by the same author as the one. So both of these books kind of fall into a futuristic sci-fi world. The one is easily one of my favorite books. I love the one. Cannot say enough positive. The Family Experiment was really, really good, and this is a 4-star read for me. It wasn't as amazing as the one, and I wanted it to be, and my goodness, the concept felt like it was going to be. So this book read to me like a book that was trying to warn us about our future, which I think the one does also. But I feel like this one takes it to such an extreme. I'm finding that personally I have a harder time connecting behind the emotional appeal that this one sends to you. Let me go backwards and explain what the book is about, and maybe it'll make more sense. So, The Family Experiment, first of all, this was an audiobook, and I highly recommend the audiobook because it was done so well. Like, it had sound effects. It was cool. I love the audiobook. So, the premises of this is it is in the future, and there's a reality TV show where 5 couples get an AI child they are taking care of online 24/7 for 9 straight months. And every piece of this is filmed, broadcasted, live, 24/7. So it's like Big Brother on steroids. And every month, the children age significantly. So they kind of get the newborn stage and then the toddler stage. And by the end of the 9 months, you have an 18-year-old child. And then the twist is what's going to happen at the end of the competition is everyone in the world votes for their favorite couple. That couple then gets a choice to either take on a larger chunk of prize money and terminate their AI child, or keep their AI child and not get that. And I mean, these parents spend 9 months with this child almost all the time. These parents truly are connected to these kids and develop feelings. And as the time goes on, they develop plans of like what their future life could look like after the show if they keep their child and they live in the internet world. It's really interesting to think about. As soon as I heard that concept of this is going to be fantastic. Now, not surprising, the author is trying to send this message of how much technology is too much. At what point do we need to take a step back and look at what we're doing? The question of, are these AI generated electronic people comes up. So like if they commit a crime, is it really a crime? If someone commits a crime to them, is it a crime? And they like at one point, because a lot of the book is broken up by like different interviews and articles and stuff about just people talking about these topics in general. And one part they literally talked about how advertisers were advising pedophiles to use this as their outlet because then children are safer. And like, obviously, holy smokes, there's so much controversy there. Books like this make you sit back and just think of like the what ifs and how would you react and how do you feel about these issues. All that part I love. The reason it's a 4-star instead of a 5-star is it does get to a very extreme level. Just like the one, there are twists in the end that I did not see coming at all. But I do feel like the message was very powerful and it could have just stayed there. And instead, the author took it to a whole nother level, which was also just shocking. But also, I think it almost was too much. Like it became almost too unbelievable. So it was a 4-star read. I'm really glad I read it. I still have a few books by this author that are on my TBR that I haven't read yet, that I will still be continuing to read. I really think that the way this author thinks through the future and how technology in the world is going to impact us is fascinating. I also think it's not that far off. Like at one point, okay, so I'm in education, right? And at one point they talked about the fact that kids in the future actually only go to school a few days a week because the other days they stay home and an AI teaches them. But I feel like that could be a real thing in a few years. It's interesting. It's very interesting. And finally, my only 5-star book of the month was In 5 Years. This was also part of my TBR video that I shared. I had to laugh for a second because if you've read this book, you know, but I had just finished River Sing Me Home, and in my vlog, I was like, God, I need a pick-me-up. I hope In 5 Years is a pick-me-up. If you've read this book, you know I couldn't be farther from the truth. It was not a pick-me-up, but it was so good. Goodreads says this is a romance. I think it's a literary fiction. So the premises of this book is you've got Danny. Danny is having the perfect day of her life. She just got engaged to her boyfriend. She just had a terrific interview at her all-time dream job. Everything is going perfect. She goes to bed that night and she has a dream. I think that's kind of where you get into like almost a little magical realism here, because it doesn't feel like a dream. It's 5 years later and she's with another man in another place and nothing seems to make sense. And then she wakes up, she's back in the normal timeline and living her life, but always with this like question mark in the back of her head, like, who was that guy? What was happening? And then what gets really weird is like 4 years down the line in the regular timeline, that guy ends up dating her best friend. And so she's like, okay, so it wasn't a dream because he's real. He's like right there. So it turns into a little bit of her like being like, I don't want to ruin my friendship, and I'm engaged to this other guy. This is weird. What do I do? That's the romance part of this. It's so much heavier and deeper than that. And I don't want to get into too much details, but really this turns into a story of friendship and how Danny is with that friend and what happens in their life when things get really bad. And this one made me pull out the tissues. I cried when I read this one. It's so powerful. I think it's such a great story of friendship. I think it's a great representation of the fact that love isn't always about a romantic partner. This one illustrated that perfectly in the worst ways possible, but in the best ways possible, because I sobbed, but this is going to be one I hold on to for a while, and I'm really glad I read this one. All in all, not a bad reading month. We had some major unexpected flops, but we also had some shocking surprise wins. So I think this is why me being a mood reader is such an important part to me being a reader, and something I'm going to really hold on to as I dive into this channel, because I know a lot of booktubers can go into the rabbit hole of reading what they think is going to look good and talking about on a video. But I want to stay true to myself and continue to mood read, because sometimes you pick up books you didn't think were going to be wins that don't match your typical vibe, your typical genre, and they turn into books that you hold on to for a very long time. So you never know until you open that book. Before you go, make sure you like this video, comment down below, and tell me about a book down below that shocked you, that you never expected that you would like, but turned out to be a book that was one of your all-time favorites. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye.